The wind moved across the open plains like a whisper from another world, carrying dust, the smell of dry grass, and the ache of hunger with it. And every step the Comanche woman took toward the ranch felt heavier than the last. Not because her legs were weak, but because her heart was, pounding against her ribs like it wanted to escape the shame she was carrying. Her daughter's small body pressed against her side, thin arms looped around her neck, breath shallow, lips cracked, eyes too tired for a child who should have been laughing instead of surviving. And as the ranch fence came into view with its clean lines, stacked wood and grazing horses, it felt like a different universe from the one she had walked through for weeks. Empty camps, abandoned fires, bones of animals long gone, her people scattered by hunger and loss. And yet this place was full of life, full of food, full of what she no longer had, and that fullness was exactly what made her fear it, because fullness belonged to those with power, and she had none left, not pride, not strength, not even a future she could promise her child, only this moment, only this choice. And when the rancher appeared, and tall, broad, his face lined by sun and years, not cruel but cautious, his eyes trained to measure threats before kindness, she stopped, swallowed, and forced herself to meet his gaze, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching until it felt louder than words. And finally she stepped forward, lowering her daughter gently to her hip, lifting her chin in the only dignity she had left, and in a voice that barely held together she made her offer, not in words of desire but in words of surrender, offering herself not because she wanted to, but because hunger leaves no room for want, only need. And the rancher stiffened, not in anger but in shock, because what she was offering was not her body but her last piece of worth in a world that had taken everything else. And the child shifted, weak fingers tugging at her mother's necklace, and that small motion cracked something open in him, something buried under years of surviving his own losses. And suddenly the offer wasn't a transaction but a mirror, reflecting what happens when people are pushed too far by a world that doesn't care if they live or starve. And he looked past the woman's fear and saw the child's hollow cheeks, the way her eyes followed the bread on his table, not with greed but with quiet longing. And instead of accepting, he turned, lifted a plate, placed bread and meat on it, and held it out to them with hands that trembled just a little. And the woman froze, confused, suspicion and hope fighting inside her chest. And when he said, "You don't owe me anything," the words felt heavier than any demand ever could. Because mercy is harder to understand than cruelty when you've lived too long without it. And as the child reached for the food with a soft gasp, the woman felt her knees weaken, tears burning behind her eyes, not of sadness but of something more painful, relief, the kind that comes when you're no longer alone in carrying the weight of survival. And as they ate, slowly, carefully, like people who didn't trust abundance to stay, the rancher watched them not as an owner, watch his property, but as a man, watch his life return, where it almost disappeared. And in that moment something changed between them all, something invisible but powerful, a bridge built not by blood or land or deals but by compassion. And as the sun dipped lower over the plains, painting the sky in gold and red, it felt like a promise, not that life would be easy, but that it would not be empty. And if this story has already touched something in you, if you believe stories of kindness deserve to be told, remember to subscribe to the channel, because every subscription helps keep these stories alive and reaching hearts that need them. After that first simple meal, the world did not magically become kind, but something inside all of them shifted, and that shift mattered more than land or money ever could. Because once the woman and her daughter were fed, the sharp edge of desperation softened just enough for them to see the ranch not as a place of power, but as a place of possibility. And the rancher, whose name she later learned was Elias, found himself doing things he hadn't planned, offering a blanket when the evening cold crept in, pointing to the small guest room near the barn when he noticed the child shivering. And though the woman hesitated, because kindness often hides a cost, the exhaustion in her bones overruled her fear, and she accepted the shelter not as comfort but as survival. And in the quiet of the night, as the wind brushed against the wooden walls and the horses shifted in their stalls, she sat awake beside her sleeping daughter, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that if she slept the world might steal her again. And Elias, sitting outside with a cup of cooling coffee, found himself remembering his own past, the drought that had taken his cattle years ago, the illness that had taken his wife, The way grief had hollowed him until work was the only language he still spoke. And seeing this woman, proud even in her weakness, protective even in her hunger, reopened a part of him he thought was buried. Not romantic, not possessive, but human. Deeply human. The part that remembers that survival is not meant to be done alone. And over the following days he brought food without being asked. Bread, soup, milk, fruit. Small, careful offerings that respected her dignity. And she in return helped where she could. Mending cloth, sweeping floors, watching over the animals with a gentleness that surprised him. And slowly trust grew, not because they talked about it, but because it proved itself again and again. In warm meals, in quiet mornings, in the way he never asked for more than she chose to give. And when other ranch hands looked at her with suspicion, he shut it down with a look. Not because he felt ownership, but because he felt responsibility. And responsibility is the true root of goodness. And the child, whose name was Ayana, began to laugh again. A soft sound at first like a bird testing its wings, then louder, freer, chasing dust motes in sunlight. And that sound-filled spaces Elias didn't know were empty. And one evening, as they watched the sky turn purple and gold, the woman told him pieces of her story. The famine, the loss of her people, the long walk, the nights she held her daughter and prayed not for herself, but for one more day of strength. And Elias listened not as a rescuer, but as a witness. And witnessing is sometimes the greatest form of respect. And in that sharing, something settled between them. Not love in the romantic sense, but kinship. A quiet understanding that their brokenness did not disqualify them from belonging. And if this chapter is making you feel something, hope, sadness, warmth, then this is your reminder to subscribe to the channel, because every subscription helps keep stories like this alive and reminds us that compassion still matters. The world, of course, did not stop being harsh just because 3 people found peace within it. And when traders came through the region with news of new conflicts, new laws, new pressures that would push indigenous families even further away from settled lands, the woman felt the old fear return like a shadow at her back. Because safety that depends on one place can vanish when the world decides it no longer belongs to you, and she began to prepare herself again for leaving. Not because she wanted to, but because she had learned that attachment can be dangerous when survival is fragile. And Elias noticed the change, the way she grew quieter, the way she packed and unpacked the same small bundle of belongings. And instead of demanding answers, he offered choice. And choice is the rarest gift power can give, telling her she and her daughter could stay as long as they wished. Not as charity, not as workers bound by debt, but as people, as family if they chose it. And the word family landed between them heavier than any promise. Because family means roots, and roots mean vulnerability. And the woman struggled with that, torn between the safety of movement and the strength of stillness, between the past that taught her to flee and the present that invited her to stay. And in the end, it was Ayana who made the choice, not in words but in action, running into Elias's arms one morning with a laugh that said more than any speech could. And in that moment, the woman understood that protecting her child did not only mean keeping her alive, it meant allowing her to belong, and so she stayed, not because she owed anything, but because she chose to. And over time, the ranch changed too, becoming not just a place of work, but a place of refuge, where kindness was as valuable as cattle, and compassion as important as fences, and travelers who passed through felt it, the difference, the quiet warmth that cannot be built but only grown. And the woman found herself no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she was becoming, a mother not only of survival but of future. And Elias found that the emptiness he carried was not gone but transformed, shaped into something that could hold others instead of only itself. And this is how healing works, not by erasing pain but by giving it purpose. And if this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. The smallest act of kindness can change the direction of a life. And if you believe in that, if you want more stories that remind us of our shared humanity, please subscribe to the channel, because every subscription is a way of saying these stories matter.